Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and I am very happy to be welcomed by Miguel Blacutt, who is one of the coaches at Revive Stronger. If you did not already know, I am incredibly disappointed and I've not been doing a good enough job of highlighting that fact. So now I'm going to highlight it further. He is one of the coaches at Revive Stronger and we're incredibly proud and happy to have him as one. And it's a way too long overdue catch up on how Miguel's doing, talking and picking his brain because he is incredibly smart and well read and well versed in the literature. So first of all, Miguel, why do you look like a different person?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on, Steve. I appreciate that. And if you guys can't notice from the last time I was on the podcast, I've gotten my haircut for the first time in 3 years. So I can't recognize myself in the mirror. Half the time I think there's an intruder in my house. But yeah, it was an awesome transformation. Not the transformations that we're used to on these channels, but still a good one.
It's funny, me and Pascal were literally talking, I think it was yesterday, about how visually we've changed through doing that podcast like on a weekly basis. And like there was periods of time when my face was like completely gone and I was orange, and then I had my head shaved, and then Pascal's like had complete moon face at one point and he's kind of shrunk back down.
I was thinking of that too, because I was so I'm in the process of kind of like creating a tattoo, and I was kind of creeping Pascal's page to see like what tattoos he has, and I was just like looking through like I was like all your phases, like your shrunken face, Pascal's beard, Pascal's blow up face, Pascal now, and then of course he has like a ton of pictures with you. So I was like, wow, Steve's even. I think your neck hypertrophy too.
Yeah, hopefully it has. Hopefully I've hypertrophied more than just my neck, but that does seem to be an area that's growing. And a lot of people are going to now ask me for my secrets, and I'll just say, go check out Jeff Nippard. He seems to be the most popular talking about that. That isn't something I'll talk about. Anyway, before we get too on a tangent, I do want to kind of, first of all, go over kind of what you've been up to the last few months, Miguel, in terms of, lots of people hopefully are on watching your Instagram where you put out fantastic content. And I know you're kind of in the middle of kind of your studying, but you're also reading a study a day, which I think is fantastic and really commendable. But also just kind of, you've just recently recovered from your own injury, and you're coming through that and now getting back into kind of the big lifts and things. So yeah, just give us a bit of an update on what Miguel's been up to.
Cool. So basically, right now I am finishing up my bachelor's degree in nutritional biochemistry at McGill University. So that has been an awesome experience. I have learned a ton, and my plan was from the beginning to get a bachelor's degree in nutrition and then a master's and PhD in exercise science. The reason for that is that I believe that at least for within our sort of niche within a niche, or very specialized, dealing with very elite athletes, I think that a lot of our nutrition questions have been answered. I think that we know as long as we hit our macros, we get these vitamins, these minerals, and pick mostly wholesome, clean foods. Clean, I guess that's a trigger word. But we know that those things are likely going to maximize most performance outcomes, at least for our group. But we still have a lot of exercise science questions. If you get down to it, we still don't even know what causes muscle hypertrophy. That is still being etched out, and I think that's going to be kind of the main focus of our chat later on. So basically, where I'm at right now is that I will be starting my master's next year, and I have applied to Florida Atlantic University, to University of South Florida, Columbia, and Auckland University of Technology. Now, I won't quite disclose where my top choice is because I don't think that's a smart idea, just in case. You never know where these universities are listening to, but Steve, you know. So yeah, next year I will be beginning my master's in exercise science. I've already been admitted into one. So it looks like no matter what, it's going to be a reality. And yeah, so I should read more than one study a day. I spend probably like 2 hours reading research, but I'll just post the one that I think people will relate the most to, because a lot of it is very it's more complicated. It's biochemistry work. It's a lot of like molecular pathways that people might not be able to relate to. So that if you want to see one cool study that you can probably keep up with a day, you can go to my Instagram. And then did you have any questions about any of that?
No, that all sounds really, really exciting and yeah, really, really cool. And yeah, probably just as well not to disclose on here because yeah, you never know. You have to be careful really on social media nowadays.
Yeah. And then in terms of my back, So I herniated a disc in my back between L4 and L5. I think probably like 2 years ago now. And I was just very stubborn about it, just trying to like lift around it. And then about 4 or 5 months ago, I decided, okay, well, it's really time to do something because the pain was just unbearable at that point. So I contacted Dr. Quinn Hannock, and he has been just incredible about it. And I remember in August, I couldn't even like bend down to tie my shoe. Like that could set off a pain that would go from my fingertip down to my toe, just the most radiating of pains. And then yesterday was the first time I was actually able to deadlift a full plate, and I'm squatting, I think, 80 pounds now. So it doesn't seem like hey, like, oh, that weight's going to impress anyone. But from not being able to tie your shoe, I'm very, very happy.
Yeah, that's a big thing to overcome. I know. It's funny, actually, all of us, yourself, me and Pascal, although mine's a long time ago now, my injury, but Pascal recently not recently, a year or so ago, went through his hip surgery, and he couldn't squat and deadlift, and he had to come out of that, and now you're kind of recovering out of what you're going through. And I think what we're just highlighting is everyone to a point will discover they're going to get an injury of some sort that's probably going to set them back quite a lot. And I'm sure right now it's probably lovely the fact you can go back in the gym and start doing things, and then probably many months down the line, probably like a year in future, you'll be like, I don't even remember being injured. Like, what was this? Because sometimes I have to kind of remind myself, God, I was nowhere even able to do this stuff. Like, this is incredible. Like, look how much weight and volume I'm now able to do.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I can't even imagine what it's like for you, because a head injury, that makes, all these injuries seem like nothing.
Yeah, I whenever I do think about it, I'm like, I would have preferred to have broken my arm or something, but it led to a lot of good things. You can't really, I think, I'd never regret what happened, because we wouldn't be here today probably if that didn't happen.
Oh yeah.
So to talk about our first topic within kind of our discussion, that is a recent article that Miguel wrote that was fantastic and really well received over at our website, revivestronger.com. Miguel is actually hopefully getting an article out every month for us, which they're all very comprehensive. If you haven't kind of noticed that about Miguel, he doesn't talk any BS. He makes sure we've got all the references there. Everything there is things Miguel knows. I think sometimes, and I was definitely one of these people in the past, when I would write fitness articles or blogs, I would write them not really knowing what I was saying to a degree. Fortunately, nothing like that is on our website at the moment, but I have had blogs before this one where I was like that. So if you are looking to keep up with a good blog, this will definitely be one article a month. So anyway, the article that Miguel talked about was kind of why potentially we shouldn't be chasing soreness in the gym. I think a lot of you are aware of delayed onset muscle soreness, that kind of pain that we feel maybe after we've done something like lunges in our glutes. This is kind of whether or not it's wanted and whether or not it is a pathway to hypertrophy. So I don't know if you kind of want to begin, Miguel, kind of what the old model of hypertrophy was, what's developing. Obviously, you already said that we don't actually know what causes hypertrophy at the moment, but we have some good kind of data coming out at the moment.
Right. Yeah. Perfect introduction to the topic. So in 2010, Dr. Brad Schoenfeld wrote a seminal paper talking about muscle hypertrophy being mechanical tension, muscle damage, and metabolic stress. Briefly, mechanical tension is pretty much what it sounds. It is a tension that you place upon your muscle fibers. It's kind of weird to think about, but your muscles can't actually push on anything. Any pushing movement is actually caused by pulling. Your muscles just kind of pull on joints and cause a pushing action. So just like in any sort of pulley system, the tension is going to be caused by the weight that is sort of at the end of that rope. And it seems that in order to keep gaining muscle mass, we need to keep kind of increasing that load and cause that progressive tension overload. Metabolic stress is the accumulation of the byproducts of something called anaerobic glycolysis, and that is the energy production that your muscles go through when they're deprived of oxygen, so very fast energy. And that causes the accumulation of hydrogen ions, it causes the accumulation of inorganic phosphate, and causes muscle hypoxia, which is the lack of oxygen. And then further, muscle damage is those little micro tears in the muscles that everyone has told. As soon as you step into the gym, people tell you, well, the way that you grow your muscle mass is by causing these little micro tears in the muscle, and then they're going to build back. They're going to build back stronger and bigger. So that is sort of what we're challenging here. It is the notion that we need muscle damage in order to get muscle hypertrophy. And it's been theorized because, of course, like scientists don't actually write in the literature, it causes your muscles to build back stronger and bigger. It's been theorized that this muscle damage can start to initiate the immune system response that is needed in order for muscle hypertrophy, which is going to cause a secretion of growth factors and may have an impact on satellite cell activation, which for now it seems that is needed for muscle hypertrophy, although that is being questioned too.
So yeah, I mean, I think the point you made there about the kind of breaking it down to then cause it to build itself back up is something a lot of us have heard. And where are we seeing now the kind of main driver of hypertrophy being, what are like the practical implications of that? And kind of, I'll ask a follow-up question after that, actually.
So right now, at least we don't have any like the research to make it conclusive, but it seems that pretty much all the things that we have compared to each other, if we look at studies on training frequency, on rest periods, on rest pause, on pretty much all variables that we can look at, it seems that the group that does the most amount of volume seems to be the one that seems to grow the most, at least within reason, right? If we get people and we make them do 60 sets, they might not grow more than people who do like 50 sets or 30 sets. But within reason and within a high quality of training, it seems that the progressive tension overload mediated by increases in volume is the main driver of hypertrophy. At least that is a model that I will be proposing as sort of we talk about why I don't think that damage is a driver of hypertrophy.
Mm-hmm. And then when we're thinking about, obviously when we train, some of the things that drive mechanical tension and progressive overload in that manner lead to muscle damage. So some people might be thinking like, how do I kind of practically go about this? How do I manage the fact that I'm trying to overload, but then overloading causes some of this soreness, but I thought soreness wasn't wanted? Kind of what's the practical recommendations to kind of coaches and trainees out there?
So I think that before we kind of get into that, I think it is a good idea to sort of like talk about why damage might not be the growth, because I kind of want to make the case against it before I start kind of telling people to not go into it, because I want you to sort of believe what I'm saying, or at least have the evidence to make the decision for yourself. So sort of where we can begin this is, first of all, by looking at growth that happens in the absence of damage. So if we look at something like blood flow restriction training, in blood flow restriction training, what we are going to do is that we are going to occlude the proximal part of a limb, so the one that is closest to you, and we are going to prevent the venous return of blood without preventing the arterial blood from going to the limb. Now, what that is going to do is that is going to cause those metabolic byproducts that I just talked about to sort of fatigue the muscle fibers. And it's going to fatigue them in a way where it's going to probably cause greater fiber recruitment. Your muscles are going to have to recruit more muscle fibers at a lighter load. And because we are using light loads, we aren't going to quite induce so much damage. In fact, a lot of studies show that you can do blood flow restriction training without inducing muscle damage. Now, there was a meta-analysis by Lixandra et al. In 2018 that compared sort of all the studies that have compared blood flow restriction training to high-intensity traditional training, the training that does cause a lot of damage. And they found that both training modalities cause very similar hypertrophy, except one causes it without damage and one causes a significant amount of damage. So in this sort of study, we get to see, all right, well, we have growth without damage. We have mechanical tension plus damage causing the same growth as just mechanical tension. So if we expect muscle damage to be a main driver, that's what we're saying. We're saying that muscle damage can cause muscle damage can cause muscle hypertrophy, then we should expect to at least see a little bit more growth. Now, the follow-up question is, does this go the other way around? Can we get muscle hypertrophy with damage but no tension? How can we do that? Well, if we look at marathon runners, a running step is broken down into two phases. It's broken down into the eccentric braking, you absorbing the force of the last step, and concentric propulsion. So the eccentric braking is going to cause damage. Now, if we look at marathon runners, if we look at people who run downhill, we see a whole lot of muscle damage, but we don't see any muscle hypertrophy. Probably because there is no mechanical tension, because these steps are so quick, because you're just doing body weight stuff, there isn't a whole lot of mechanical tension. So we have growth with tension but no damage, but we have no growth when we have damage without tension. And if we are making the case that muscle damage is a primary driver of muscle hypertrophy, then we should probably see growth in this scenario. Then there was kind of another study to sort of highlight this, and it's probably one of my favorite studies. It's done by Flonadol in 2011. And what they did is they took people through a protocol, and they split them into two groups. One got a 3-week intro block before an 8-week resistance training protocol. Now, an intro block is you start off sort of easy, lower intensities, maybe lower frequency, and this is sort of going to start to elicit the repeated bout effect. The repeated bout effect is a protective mechanism that your body has against muscle damage, actually. It's not quite fully 100% understood, but your body doesn't actually want to feel sore and like it's going to die after every resistance training protocol. So that's why you kind of start feeling sore. It's the repeated bout effect. So the sort of familiarization intro block starts to elicit that repeated bout effect, so that when the subjects start the 8-week training block, they don't have quite as much damage. And then one group just went right into the 8-week protocol, and volume was equated. So the group that didn't get the intro block had to squeeze those 11 weeks worth of volume into just 8 weeks. So what was seen here is that the group that didn't get the intro block saw significantly more muscle damage than the group that did. In fact, the group that got the intro block didn't have any detectable muscle damage whatsoever, but both groups got the same amount of hypertrophy. So we have volume equated, we have one group doing something that causes a lot of damage and one that doesn't. So when volume is equated, we see no differences in muscle hypertrophy, even though one group got a lot of damage and the other one didn't. So that kind of caused us to question, all right, well, does muscle damage actually have a role in muscle hypertrophy, or does it have something that mechanical tension by itself cannot deliver when it comes to muscle hypertrophy? So those are sort of the three big studies or three main topics that I kind of like to talk about when it comes down to why I don't think muscle damage has an impact on muscle hypertrophy. And then my favorite study of them all is one that was done by Damasceno in 2016. What they did in this study is that they measured pretty much just there's three big things that we're going to be talking about. They measured muscle cross-sectional area, so that is actually just when if you cut a muscle fiber kind of across, that is just really the increases that we can see. That those are the increases that we want. They measured muscle damage, and they measured myofibrillar protein synthesis. So myofibrillar protein synthesis is actually, when we talk about protein synthesis, yes, we're interested in that. But what we're really interested in is myofibrillar protein synthesis, because that is a specific type of protein that we want to grow when we're talking about resistance training. And we need labs that kind of have that really good equipment that is going to be able to measure that. So when you see myofibrillar protein synthesis, you should kind of start to salivate over that study. So they measured these things, and they put the subjects through a leg training protocol where they did leg press, leg extension, and leg curl, I want to say, for 10 weeks. And they measured these three markers at week 1, right after the last training protocol. They measured it at week 3 and at week 10. So at week 1, the researchers saw that both myofibrillar protein synthesis and muscle damage peaked. It was the highest that they saw in the whole time that it was observed. But there is no increase in muscle cross-sectional area. There was no muscle hypertrophy. So, all right, a little bit weird. Protein synthesis that's highest, but no increase in muscle hypertrophy. At week 3, both myofibrillar protein synthesis and muscle damage decreased. They remained elevated above baseline, but they decreased from the peak that they were at week 1. But still no increases in muscle hypertrophy. So still a little bit weird. And then at week 10, what they found is that both myofibrillary protein synthesis and muscle damage decreased. Muscle damage went down to baseline, but protein synthesis remained elevated above baseline. And this was the first time that muscle hypertrophy was seen. It was the first time that there was an increase in muscle cross-sectional area. So what we see here is that the only time that there is muscle hypertrophy is when protein synthesis remained elevated, but muscle damage returned to baseline. So it seems that at least to some extent, muscle damage can actually blunt the effects of hypertrophy. It probably has some deeply catabolic effects that can blunt that effect of myofibrillary protein synthesis, so much so that when protein synthesis was peaked and so was muscle damage, there was no growth. And this is seen in other studies where we see that people typically don't hypertrophy at least until 6 to 10 weeks into a new training protocol.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because it kind of highlights the thought of or like the simple thing that people probably think about is like, you don't grow in the gym, you grow outside of the gym. It's kind of, and if you're not ever reducing the muscle damage, the body's always having to repair this and never getting time to actually grow anything. So I think that's a really good highlighted point. And something it's probably a bit of a side tangent, but you brought up BFR and how the study showing how sometimes it doesn't actually cause any muscle damage, which I found really interesting because whenever I've done it, and I don't know if it's the novelty effect or something along those lines, I've always got horrendous soreness. So I found that interesting. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that at all.
I think that it can be the novelty effect because I think that, like we're going to get into, just accumulating a lot of a total load and recruiting a lot of muscle fibers, making them kind of work a lot, that is going to cause muscle damage in and out of itself. But I think that if you were to do that for a long period of time, like if you were to work that into, let's say, 2 mesocycles, then that's where you would see very low muscle damage, if any at all, but you would see the same amount of muscle hypertrophy.
Yeah, I think it's quite common for those sort of like pumpy metabolite style of techniques where initially you get like quite a high response from it and maybe you get a fair bit of soreness, and you have to be careful with your dose there because I've certainly done too much of that sort of thing and then completely screwed up the rest of my week. It was supersets Bulgarian split squats with Smith machine squats, and I did 3 sets week 1. That was
all blood flow restricted?
No. They were just no rest period supersets. Okay. But I was horrendously sore, and now I'm like, right, I'm glad I didn't program that for clients. Now I give 1 set of those because they get you. So no, it's just, again, that's almost highlighting the whole, you need to be able to give yourself an appropriate dose to actually recover and adapt to, rather than just giving yourself everything because you're just kind of, you'll blow your tank. So no, really, really great kind of reasoning behind and all the different articles. I love that you reference them because maybe we can even get them linked. Well, actually, we have the article linked below, so they have all the references there if they want to dig into
just
those.
Search up the author.
Awesome. So I don't know, did we get to now kind of made the case for why muscle damage and kind of chasing soreness might not be the ideal path? What are the practical kind of tips coming to follow that? Cool.
So the model, so I think that what we did right now is kind of went against why muscle damage is a driver of muscle hypertrophy. And as I said before, the model that at least I'm proposing and that I think people like Carl Juneau, like Menno Henselmans, like Chris Beardley are proposing, is that it seems that progressive tension overload, that is a main driver of hypertrophy. So we kind of have to think now, all right, so this is the model that we want to accept. How does muscle damage play into that? How does muscle damage affect volume, which we are using as a driver of increasing tension? And there was an interesting study done by Farid et al. In 2017, where what they did is they made people do 8 sets of 10 to failure on the bench press. So as you can imagine, they were horrendously sore, got a tremendous amount of muscle damage because going to failure just does that. And they wanted to see, okay, well, so after this hell of a protocol, how long does it take for people to recover strength and total work capacity? And they measured this at 24, 48, 72, and 96 hours after the protocol. And they saw that at 96 hours, strength returned. So it took 4 days for strength to return after this very damaging protocol. But total work capacity didn't return in that time. So if we're sort of trying to train each muscle group at least 2 times per week, which seems at least to be to be beneficial when it comes to accumulating more volume and doing it with a high training quality, then we can run into some problems. Because if it's taking you 4 days to recover from this sort of very damaging protocol, then that is going to play into how much volume you're going to be able to accumulate in later training sessions, as seen here. So the first thing that I think that we kind of need to talk about is that if you are accumulating a whole bunch of damage, it seems that is going to really affect your ability to perform more volume later on in the week, especially if we're trying to train things more than once a week. And I think that this is probably why bro splits were what they were, because people got in there, absolutely destroyed the muscles, and it's like, yeah, after 4 days you can't really do as much volume, you can't really have that good of a training protocol as highlighted in the study, so let's just train each muscle group once per week so we can absolutely murder ourselves and be in some masochistic pain.
Yeah, I think that it's a brilliant kind of highlighting why that became what people did, because I think bodybuilders just out and out, often without being smart, would just go and destroy a muscle group, and that's almost, they'd leave the gym kind of that typical leaving the gym like hobbling after a leg day, or like they can't touch their shoulder because their bicep pump's so big.
I miss doing that.
Yeah, I know. I can actually vividly remember in sessions training until I couldn't do that, and that was my biofeedback for whether or not I'd had a good bicep workout. So no, that really highlights it really well, where we have kind of, in many ways, I think it kind of surrounds itself to some of the volume landmark work by Mike Israetel and James Hoffman, in terms of like, if you're trying to do a certain amount of volume in a week, kind of you have to think about how you then spread that to get the most amount of quality, and not doing too much in one go, because then, yeah, your quality goes down the drain. And it's why kind of if you can't have the highest amount of volume, the highest amount of relative or absolute intensity, and kind of see the best progress, you have to have a balance of the two. So I think that really well explains that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it does really kind of play into account the fact that we maybe splitting things out into different training frequencies won't necessarily lead to greater hypertrophy just because you did it 2 times rather than 1 time per week. But I think that the main driver of frequency improving muscle hypertrophy is probably that better exercise quality that you get in there from not having to do like 20 sets of chest in a day.
Yeah, I think apart from obviously we've spoken about too much volume maybe in one session being kind of not a very good thing to do because of the amount of recovery that it's going to provide. Again, too high training intensities could potentially be one as well, where obviously like you said, when you train to failure, the likelihood that you're going to get a load of muscle damage and soreness after that is quite high. That can then again kind of hit our volume, how much we can get in there. I think some other ones that I think were mentioned in the article as well are kind of switching out exercises all the time. So that novelty effect that we spoke about, kind of dropping in, change your exercises all the time, is probably going to cause a lot of damage but not productive growth. And then just being very careful, like if you're doing new exercises, start off with a small amount of volume that you can then, like you said, you adapt to it, and then you can provide more growth going forward. So no, I think really well explained. I think people should check out the article. I don't know if you've got any other kind of comments to make on that.
Right. Yeah, I have two points that I kind of want to make for the practical applications, and that is, touching on what you said about switching up new exercises. So if we go back to that paper by Damas et al., the one where they measured myofibrillary protein synthesis, muscle damage, and muscle growth, then what we can sort of tell there is that if you are constantly switching out new exercises, then you are constantly kind of taking your body before that repeated bout effect and causing a lot of damage. And what we can see in that paper is that when damage is the highest, even if protein synthesis is the highest, that is sort of, you aren't going to get optimal muscle hypertrophy. So if you're constantly switching out new exercises, you are constantly putting yourself in that phase where damage is high, and that will probably have some negative impacts on muscle hypertrophy. You're also going to feel sore, and that will likely reduce the total amount of volume that you can do. So my sort of practical recommendation, and I think that you will agree with this, Steve, is that the main compound movements, the ones that cause the most amount of muscle damage, I like to sort of keep those in for at least like 8 to 12 weeks. It depends on the athlete. It depends on whether people get bored or not. If someone wants to shoot themselves after 4 weeks of back squats, then client adherence is the number one thing. But if I can sort of get away with it, I'll I'll try to have those main movements in there for at least 8 to 12 weeks.
Yeah, it makes really good sense. You kind of get that good. It's kind of like just you learn it, then you get that momentum, and then you get really good at it. I always describe it like when you're riding a bike, or even when you learn to drive a car. Like initially it's really awkward and uncomfortable. Then as you get really, really good at it, you can get to destinations faster, so you actually see better growth. It's only after a while that potentially, like you said, adherence and potentially staleness and those sort of things that could lead to someone wanting to change a movement or injury or something along those lines. So no, brilliant, really exciting stuff. And I think the audience will really appreciate your kind of work on that and hearing what you had to say. The next thing I wanted to talk to you about is probably, if we touch on the next article that you're working on, just what you found so far, what the listeners can kind of look forward to as the next article coming along from us. And yeah, just run with that, and then we can always go on to some other bits afterwards.
Awesome. Yeah. So the listeners will be glad to hear the fact that I'm going to be, or I am almost finishing up an article on CBD oil and how it impacts their resistance training. I think that a lot of work that has kind of been talking about CBD recently kind of talks about, so when we look at THC, when we look at CBD, the main beneficial actions when it comes to these things are through the cannabinoid receptors, CB1 and CB2. And a lot of work that is often cited is about the benefits that binding to these receptors can have, and the many wonderful things that these receptors can do. As been talked about ad nauseum, decrease inflammation, decrease stress, decrease anxiety, induce sleep, all these things. And THC is very powerful at binding to these receptors. When we talk about a receptor in the brain or a receptor anywhere else, not everything binds to the receptor the same way. There are some things that are going to have higher receptor affinity and some things that are going to have lower receptor affinity. CBD oil has very low affinity actually for CB1 and CB2, but it does seem to have benefits in other receptors. So sort of what this article is going to be looking at, all right, well, what does the evidence say about how CBD can actually decrease anxiety and induce sleep and cause relaxation in people who don't necessarily have a high amount of anxiety? It seems that CBD does have benefits in people who have anxiety, who have kind of these issues at more of a clinical state. But I'm looking at it, how does this affect us resistance trained athletes who might not have? Sure, I think we all have a little bit of anxiety, but not that like debilitating anxiety that a lot of people who are using these products do have. I want to look at that. I'm also going to be looking at the effects that it can have on relaxation, and further, I'm going to be looking at if this can have anti-inflammatory benefits to the point where it can actually blunt hypertrophy, because we do know that if we take constant anti-inflammatories post-workout, or even antioxidants post-workout, this can blunt muscle hypertrophy. So what I'm going to be looking at is, all right, well, is CBD oil powerful enough to actually do this? And a lot of these companies, they aren't quite looking at stuff for resistance-trained athletes, even though resistance-trained athletes are sort of promoting it. Steve, I think, like we said, is because a lot of these people have codes for them and can benefit a lot from them. So I just really want to be the first one to objectively look at it for athletes. And this article is going to be objective. I'm not going to be either completely destroying them or completely putting them on a pedestal. It will be just what the science says.
And this is what I love about Miguel and what he puts out, because like I said to you off air, Miguel, I think a lot of people reach out to you and look at your stuff because they trust in what you're saying, and that you're not affiliated with any companies. You don't have any kind of like any other side objective that you're trying to get across. You're just literally a scientist and you're trying to kind of find the truth. Something I'm really interested in, it obviously you've been looking into CBD much more heavily than I have, but whenever I looked into it, and like I said, I haven't done a lot of research, I didn't find a lot of human data on CBD oil specifically. What's the data been like that you've been looking at, and how much has been kind of very useful? Like how much of it is actually like, how much is it you just waiting for actually decent studies?
A lot of it is just waiting for decent studies. I don't think that we have enough human data. I don't think that we have enough human data on CBD itself. We have quite a bit of data on THC and the effects that that can have on the CBD receptors, but not quite so much on the extent that CBD can have on these receptors or anywhere else. And then we have even like the amount that we have on people who are healthy and who don't have, like I said, these very kind of like clinical psychological, or these clinical psychological states, is even lower. So I think that people like to look at research in other populations that don't necessarily apply to them and use that as, hey, look at this. But it's like, if someone doesn't have that degree of anxiety and they're taking CB, maybe it won't take you from like just being normal to even being more relaxed. It might just not do anything. So that's kind of where I want to go with this, and where I want further research to be done is, all right, well, what will it do for me? Because I think, Steve, as you have seen, I get anxious at pretty much literally nothing. I'm a very calm person. So I wonder if CBD can do anything for me, or for people who maybe get anxious over, like, all right, well, if you have like a test that's worth like 80% of your grade, you're obviously going to have some anxiety for that. But other than that, what can I do for the average Joe?
Yeah, I think that would be really beneficial. And I'm glad I asked you the question on the studies, because I think a lot of people just, they hear that there's a study supporting it, and that could be cherry picked. It could be for someone who isn't even, that's like some of the golden rules of looking at studies is it applicable to you as an individual, or is it done on someone who's completely different to you, or on a rat, which is quite often the case. So,
right. Is it done in a petri dish? And,
yeah.
and a lot of these studies are.
And something that interests me with it as well is, from what I've seen as well, there seems to be a lot of different forms of it, in that there's CBD oil, then there's like hemp water, there's like people vaping it. And I'm assuming that the fact that there's lacking research just on CBD oil, but then all of these different types that are coming out, again, can we even be sure that they're doing anything?
I think that we can't right now. I think that, first of all, we need to sort of do the research on whether CBD oil is beneficial in and out of itself. Again, it does seem to be beneficial in people who are in clinical psychological states, but I think that seeing whether it can have an impact on just the average Joe, we need to do that research, and then kind of look at, all right, well, what is the most appropriate method of having this? I think that most people, and most of the evidence does seem to be into that CBD kind of like liquid extract that you often see people use with a little dropper. But I think that we need further evidence. Think, all right, well, how does this compare to orally ingesting it, or vaping it, or smoking it? Because that's the main way people get THC, for example.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I think the only final thing that I want to hammer home with this is, just like any supplement, you have to, like, there needs to be a wealth of evidence before like you or me would ever promote it. So for like resistance training athletes, I think the list is just so small for actual like evidence-based things that are really going to have some help there. And then when we think about supplements, even something like we hear creatine monohydrate is something that all kind of resistance training athletes should probably be taking. And even then, the difference between you not taking it and taking it is minimal. So again, these supplements sometimes can cost a hefty amount, and sometimes it's just not worth that investment for something that you're just, especially at the moment, not sure of.
Mm-hmm, right. And I think that the evidence on CBD for resistance trained athletes is so low that I think that the main way that the main mechanism of action that it would have wouldn't quite be on being an anti-inflammatory or anything like that. It would, I think, at least for now, it would be just through sheer relaxation. So I think that if you can find another way to relax, to unwind, to do stuff like that, then I think that would probably have a similar beneficial effect. You just doing things like being with your significant other, having a sports massage, watching your favorite show, going out and eating good food, getting enough sleep, those things are going to be kind of the main drivers of that effect. Some people can't do those things without having tremendous anxiety, but if you can just shut off your brain, read a book, watch a show, then I think that is going to have very similar effects on relaxation.
Perfect. Yeah, and I just want to make it obvious because you already said it, but I think from the outside in, it might seem like we're being very negative about CBD. I think it's just more so being realistic in the fact that we don't want people to be spending money that is not warranted. And like you said, like some of those, like the relaxation, what's it called? Something touch, sensual touch or something along those lines. I can't remember what it's called in the research, but that's actually got like heavily, like good research indicating things like massages and like, touch from a loved one, it
seems touch in general from a human being can promote relaxation, which is very funny to just being touched by another person. See, I think by a person you trust, sort of. I don't think
just a random guy.
I think one tends to trust massage parlors. At least I hope so. I hope you can trust them, but that does seem to promote relaxation quite a bit.
Yeah, I think it's a case of typical human behavior. We're looking for something that's kind of almost shortcutting, so it's much easier to go and take something than have to actively go and like think about relaxing. Like, I can take this and this will relax me. But it doesn't quite always work like that. But anyway, I thought that was really interesting. And then something I did want to touch on, and maybe CBD is related to this, but I think I'd be really interested to hear, Miguel, what you think at the moment are kind of some of the myths or the things that are coming out in the industry that kind of are maybe upsetting, and potentially one you recently talked about I think would be really cool to actually touch on is obviously yesterday was Thanksgiving, and there's personal trainers out there giving all sorts of funny advice, whether or not it's like how to manage Thanksgiving and not eat kind of your face off, and then other people just telling you to go completely the opposite way. And I thought you had a really great message about that. So I don't know if you want to talk to that first.
Right. Cool. Yeah. I actually got so many DMs, some people being like, thank you so much for saying this. So yeah, as it was Thanksgiving in the States yesterday, and a lot of these big fitness accounts, I think, became very popular by kind of taking the extreme out of fitness, and, very good for them. And with this, they started to propagate that, all right, well, in Thanksgiving and your birthday, in Christmas, don't worry about your eating tendencies. Don't worry about any eating history that you have. Just go grab a plate, enjoy a ton of food, and go back to regular life. But some people just can't do this. Like, some people have had serious eating disorders, have had anorexia, bulimia, binging, purging. And for them, they can't just get a plate of food, stuff their face one day, and go back to regular life the next one. So I think that when we're looking at the advice that these big fitness accounts are giving, you can't just take everything. You can't just tell everyone to, under no circumstances should you deny yourself this pleasure of overeating on Thanksgiving. I think that is similar to telling an alcoholic, hey, on your birthday, on Christmas, just have a drink. Don't worry about your addiction. Just have a drink, and then the next day don't. Some people can't just do this. Some people are going to binge on Thanksgiving and then go throw up and do hours of cardio and not eat for 3 days afterwards. Or some people are going to binge and then binge for a week. So I think that we always have to take the fitness industry as a whole when we're giving this advice, and take into account that in this industry, we are dealing with a lot of people who have had a lot of serious eating disorders. And we can't just tell people under no circumstance should you be denied the holiness of this incredible meal. There are those people. There are people in contest prep, and there are people who just like doing this will just cause a lot of mental acrobatics. So I think that when it comes to these holidays, and I think that we're also going to be releasing a holiday article that I'm also working on. I think that really the best thing to do is just whatever will cause you the least amount of stress and whatever you are okay with. I think that it's kind of an uncomfortable conversation to have with yourself to decide what you will be the most comfortable with. I think that it's very uncomfortable to be like, hey, I can't have 3 plates of Thanksgiving dinner. But if you have that conversation with yourself and you admit to yourself, I'm not ready for this yet, then that will lead to a much more enjoyable holiday for yourself.
Yeah, I love that perspective because I think to quote, I think it's from like Spider-Man or something, with great power comes great responsibility. And I very much feel like like on this podcast, we have thousands of views, thousands of listeners, and we have a responsibility to put out information that we feel is going to be helpful. So giving out black and white advice like that, as people know, we love the shades of grey on this podcast. It's important to give context and kind of really feel out every person that you could be impacting. And like you said, some of these big fitness accounts, they probably actually have got big by being that kind of black and white, hard lined. But in reality, what impact are they having that's really positive? It may be way overshadowed by those who are looking in and being kind of really kind of unfortunately harmed by some of the messages that they're giving out. And I definitely see it myself, where there are either camps where are very strictly like, I think the biggest camp is basically just people are saying like you shouldn't diet over these periods of time, like you said.
Anti-diet culture. Yeah,
it's not really. It's never the perspective I've had. It's always been kind of my easy perspective, I guess. My vanilla approach is always kind of what makes you feel most happy, because what are these social occasions about? They're about family, friends, loved ones. They shouldn't really be about the food. And so whatever allows you to relax and be with your loved ones and enjoy the moment as best as possible. For some of you, that might mean like eating a load of extra food and really like indulging somewhat. And that's okay if most of the year you're pretty much on point, like you're not going to be in a problem. But if you are someone who's had a problem with kind of binging and those sort of behaviors, then probably that isn't a solution for you. And probably you do want to manage it a little bit better. And something I'd like to hear what your views on this quote is. Kind of see people push the quote of kind of memories over macros, and this is always, it makes me laugh, because when I think of that quote, I think that's coming from a person who is only considering the food as the memory, surely, because they're kind of talking about memories over macros. So it's a strange dynamic within the industry. I think when people maybe some people just don't think about it enough.
I think that one can impact the other. So I think that everyone has sort of a calorie range to which they can, maybe it will make them enjoy the occasion a little bit more, or that won't have a detrimental impact on the occasion. Steve, I think I'm going to use you as an example here. I think that, for example, you like to stay within, probably like now that you're bulking within a few hundred calories, that if you hit this minimum or you hit this maximum, you're happy. And I'm using you as an example because I don't really track macros, so I can't use it myself. But right now, let's say, for example, you're comfortable, I don't know your numbers, but you're comfortable eating somewhere between 3,400 and 4,000 calories a day. Let's say that if you hit 4,000 calories a day, all right, maybe you went over, but you're not mad about it. If then I tell you, all right, Steve, memories over macros, let's go out, let's go to Italy, and let's have chocolate pizza for breakfast, let's have a pasta for lunch, and let's have a calzone for dinner, and then a pizza for dinner number 2. And you're going to hit 6,000 calories, all right? Now, you don't have an eating disorder, but you ate so much that it probably ruined your goals for that week. And now the memory is not going to be as good because it's going to be filled with, hey, like, oh my gosh, like, why did I eat like that? Why did I do this to myself? So I think that memories over macros is kind of one of those things that has a range where, all right, well, you can push so much outside of your calorie target, but if you just like completely go overboard, it will actually ruin the memory. And if you just don't eat anything, then it will also ruin the memory, because you're going to be like, oh well, probably could have enjoyed some food and not been the guy that brought a Tupperware full of chicken and Brussels sprouts to Thanksgiving dinner. Yeah,
I think it's a good point, and something that's reminding me of what you're saying there is kind of. I think it was from Dan John originally. It was kind of eat like an adult, kind of that.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what that really means. Obviously, in reality, a lot of adults eat terribly, but eating like an adult just means everyone listening to this podcast, they would eat like an adult. They know what that means. It means eat mindfully, don't kind of go crazy. There's no point in it. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's a strange topic that people get really stressed about. And for the most part, I think, the message you gave out on that was really, really positive. So I have to thank you for that. And I think a lot of people, like you said, you got lots of DMs because it was a really good message. So I don't know if there's anything else recently that's kind of cropped up. Actually, I did want to highlight the fact you spoke about the article that we'll be working on. And I think we're going to do a 3-way podcast at some point where we get us all on, Pascal as well, to talk about, a holiday article, how to approach the holidays. And we don't get Christmas holidays.
Yeah, just holidays in general, and I think we're going to be telling because we've been there. We have been those people kind of bringing Tupper or measuring or whatever at dinner. So I kind of proposed the idea to you guys about us telling like the biggest kind of fitness fanatic story we've had. I think people are going to laugh at mine. I won't tell you guys quite what it is, but it's actually quite terrible.
I've actually, funny on that topic, I've only once in my life taken a scale to a restaurant. Have you actually ever done it, Miguel?
No, I haven't. I've ordered stuff that I can like track, like just ordering like sashimi or nigiri or stuff like that, but I haven't quite taken one to a restaurant yet. But maybe if I hadn't been with family who would have like kicked my ass, I probably would have.
Yeah, mine was in contest prep in 2014.
Okay.
And I didn't really know any better, but it wasn't a fun experience at all. Like I can just to, not that it's that interesting a memory, but putting on a jack of potato on the scale and then having to cut more than half of it away and put it to the side and be like, I can't eat that. Yeah, that was a bit of a distressing experience. I didn't know really any better at the time, but or maybe I might have even done it more than once. I might have done it twice in that prep. It might have been Nando's and Harvester, which are two chains.
The repressed memories are coming back.
Yeah, these are not good memories. So yeah, I don't know if there's any other things you wanted to anything you really wanted to say or highlight that you've seen out there that maybe you can share with the audience that you feel like isn't a good message or is kind of some myth busting that you wanted to share?
I think that one thing that is kind of getting on my gears, and you hear me rant about this daily, I think, Steve, is the glucose disposal agents. I think that a lot of people it's another one of those things that people just started to propagate. I think that talking about insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity is a very interesting topic that people aren't quite qualified to speak of, but it does sound very cool. And I think that it is important for the listeners to understand that insulin sensitivity is mostly affected by your body weight, by your amount of body fat, and by your physical activity. If we are talking about our population of people, which is mostly lean individuals, because within what is considered to be lean in resistance training literature, you're lean. Like all of us are lean individuals. We're not obese. We're not I think very few of us are actually what the literature would consider a high amount of body fat. Maybe you don't look quite the way you are, but you're still considered lean. If we're looking about lean people training 3 to 7 times per week, as many of you I'm sure probably do, resistance training, you have muscle mass, your insulin sensitivity is most likely fine unless you have some sort of clinical issue, you have diabetes, you have some sort of undiagnosed thing, your insulin sensitivity is most likely fine. And it doesn't matter, you're eating like 800 grams of carbs a day bulking, or it doesn't matter if you're spending a lot of time sitting down, your insulin sensitivity is probably fine. And these people are just kind of selling these very, very expensive, cool sounding products to people saying, hey, like you need to improve nutrient partitioning. You need to, your P ratio, like just selling all these things that don't quite have a lot of science to them. And one thing that I like to sort of tell people is like, all right, let's look at NFL linemen. They're probably like 20% body fat, probably sometimes more. Do you think they have an issue with insulin sensitivity? Do you think that they're smashing down cheeseburgers and fries or whatever the case may be, and their body isn't responding well to it, and they're mostly gaining fat and not muscle mass anymore? No, they're not. So if we look at people who have a high amount of muscle mass, people who are resistance training, people who are very active, you aren't going to be running into issues with insulin sensitivity, and you aren't going to need some sort of like berberine-based product in order to boost it.
Yeah, I think it's probably similar in many ways to that CBD, where it's like that small, like there's maybe some small evidence showing some mechanistic data on some sort of people with not a load of evidence behind it. And then it's like, oh, this sounds like it's probably beneficial, so I'm just going to go with it. And people have started running with it. And again, people are affiliated with people that sell these things. And so it becomes one of those things. And I think, insulin is an incredibly interesting topic. And a lot of people are kind of getting obsessed with those things. And whenever I've spoken to like yourself about it, or Eric Helm, Mike Israetel, they've always said that it's one of those things where even if it was having any positive impact, I don't think you'd ever know. You like, it would be something you wouldn't even like ever realize, and that neither of them and neither of us recommend those sort of products. And I guess on a related note, I would like to hear your thoughts on kind of monitoring blood glucose as like a healthy, non-diabetic, natural athlete.
Mm-hmm. I think that if you are going to do this, you're pretty much spinning your wheels. Sure, you're giving yourself one more thing to track on, which most of us like don't quite need. We're already tracking enough things, and you're giving yourself something to track that you might not necessarily have a control over. Like if you have one blood glucose reading that is high, what are you going to do about it? Are you going? Let's say that your calories are good, carbs are good, you're gaining at an appropriate weight, your muscle gain is going well, and you have your blood glucose readings are high. Not high clinically, but just high from whatever you want them to be for whatever reason. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to decrease calories because your progress in the gym is going well, you're gaining muscle mass, you're energized. So why would you decrease calories? Why would you decrease carbs? Why would you increase fats? I think that if you are tracking blood glucose, you are tracking a variable that you might not necessarily have control over, or you might not know how to control. And I think that switching like 20 grams of carbs for a little bit more fat, or doing these things, isn't going to actually have a measurable impact on the effects that the blood glucose readings might have. Sure, it might have like an effect of like 0.01, but what is that actually practically going to do for your muscle mass, for your health, and for all the parameters that blood glucose might have an effect on? So I do think that people that try to monitor this, change it, whatever, they're just doing something that they can have a very minor control over, if any at all, and that then won't have a practical implication. And this is a good point. Always think about, what is the practical application of this? What is this going to do for your health, your muscle, and your performance?
Yeah, I think that was brilliantly put in that. Like already, if you're tracking 3 macronutrients, that's quite a lot to track, along with like your training numbers. If you're then monitoring or thinking about your sleep and things like this, it's already quite a lot to think about. And I don't know about you, Miguel, but whenever I've tried to make my coaching or even my training more complicated, tracking more variables, and I love data, it's actually only ever led to worse results, because it ends up taking the eye off the ball of the most important things. And I found the simpler the thing, the better the results. Like basically, the simpler my program, the simpler the number of variables that I need to measure that actually have an efficacious result, the better the result.
Definitely, and especially when you're busy. So even tracking calories for me gives me a variable that is a little bit too much at the time. So I think that you also need to ask yourselves, all right, well, what variables am I willing to track? Will this have a significant impact on my ability to gain muscle or something like that? And am I okay with this? So for example, maybe some days I overeat, maybe some days I undereat. I don't think so, because my eating is very consistent. I've learned how to do this, but maybe I could gain a little bit quicker if I tracked and sort of forced myself to eat. But currently I'm okay with it, because I am studying and working like 12 to 14 hours a day. And it's just something that I can't currently do. Sometimes I just need to grab something very quick from the cafeteria and not track it, or just have multiple protein bars and see where my hunger is at.
Yeah, I think an important point you said there was that the fact is, if you're tracking like even your body weight at certain periods of time,
I do track that.
Exactly, you're tracking that. You're tracking you're getting insufficient protein, and you're tracking training performance. By doing all of that, you're already by default knowing whether or not you're having sufficient calories. So without tracking that, you're actually you're doing other things that allow you not to need to track that level, which I think is brilliant. And that brings back to like blood glucose monitoring, in that if you are lean, your training performance is good, you feel well, and all of these variables are indicating positive things. Why you don't need a blood glucose monitor to tell you that this is going well, because it is. So it's almost like, is that data really helpful data, or is it just data just for the sake of data? I think if you're using anything like that, there has to be a clear rationale behind it, and it's not just data for data's sake.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I do think that even if you were to track it for a long period of time, it's not going to give you a whole bunch of useful information. And yeah, just track the data that you can and that you can do something about, and that you're willing to track. Like, I don't want to make it seem like I don't track anything. Like my training is very well thought out. Obviously for lower body, I do whatever Dr. Quinn Hannock tells me to. And then for upper body and for like the isolation leg stuff, I do have a very well planned, very tracked, very periodized. I track body weight and yes, I think I track sleep, steps, and those things just kind of allow me to not track calories. All those things are very easy to track. The phone just kind of tracks itself. It's in my pocket all day. Body weight just as soon as you get up. And then training is the only thing that takes time. But I love training so much. I love program training. Obviously, I'm dedicating like over 10 years of studying into this. So that's absolutely no issue for me.
Yeah, I was trying to think. I think it's HbA1c. If I think that gives you like a 6-month like average of what your levels have been. And I think that has been, from what I've heard from talking to Broderick and Mike, they said if you're going to track anything, have a look at that rather than just seeing kind of a daily kind of number or just like check it irregularly. So yeah, brilliant. I don't think we need to talk any more on that. We've already been an hour, and I want to say an absolute thank you to you, Miguel, for coming on, having a chat with me. I want to say thank you to the audience, and I want to make sure we talked about, obviously, we have the article linked below, so people can check us out there. They can check out Miguel on our coaching page, and you can kind of have a look at our services there if you were interested in kind of having Miguel as your coach. And also I want to make sure they can reach out to you, because I know you're on YouTube and also over on Instagram. So are those probably the two best places for people to reach out to you? Yeah,
so on Instagram is at mblacutt, so MBLACUTT, and then on YouTube is Miguel Blacutt. And if you also want to check me over on Facebook, I think I started to post a little bit more on there. I kind of break down a few studies, get my thoughts. So you can add me on there or follow me or whatever people do on Facebook.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have that link below. And he's part of our Revive Stronger group as well over on Facebook. So if you're part of that, then Miguel's a moderator over on there. So if you've got questions and things, he's always answering there. So thank you guys for listening. We will catch you soon. Take care.